The only surviving fragment from the lost Song of Wade has been radically misunderstood for the past 130 years. Together, Dr. Seb Falk and I have solved the most frustrating puzzle in Chaucer's writings. In the 1380s and 1390s, Geoffrey Chaucer mentions the story of Wade twice, once in The Merchant's Tale and once in Troilus and Cressida. And scholars have been puzzling over what these references mean and why he's including them in the places where he does. Because it had been long thought that the story of Wade is a story of sea monsters and Teutonic mythology and a mythological sphere of water sprites and elves. But when Seb Falk and I looked at this manuscript, what we realized is the fact that it's not elves, but wolves. And this radically shifts the ground. There is nothing mythological in it, that it's a story of human aggression, a story of chivalry, a story of courtly intrigue, and the story of Fina More. And that makes much better sense with the way that Chaucer is using this reference in his writings.
Reading these verses as part of this sermon has allowed us to really understand how preachers assembled their material in the late 12th, early 13th century. Because what this preacher is doing is taking material from a whole bunch of different sources. He's taking this quote from this Middle English poem and he's using it as a springboard for his sermon, where people become like animals, and then he goes off on this whole list of animals and their behaviours that is based in this medieval bestiary tradition. But then he also quotes a story about a Norman knight who had to humble himself before the King of France because the knight had been a traitor, he had betrayed the English, he had betrayed the French, and he went before the King of France with a noose around his neck, prostrating himself and showing his humility. And so for the preacher, it's an exercise in drawing references from wherever he can in order to keep the attention of his audience. One writer who wrote about animal behaviour was Alexander Neckam, a very famous theologian from the end of the 12th century, beginning of the 13th century. And James Wade and I saw so many similarities to Neckam's writing in this sermon, so many examples of where animal behaviours were written about in exactly the way that Neckam writes about them, that we started to think, do you know what, actually, maybe this sermon is written by Neckam himself. But whether Neckam is or isn't the author, certainly he had a big influence on the writing of this sermon. Certainly the person who wrote this sermon had read Neckam's work on animal behaviour and had studied the kinds of moral lessons that Neckam wanted his readers to take out of what he wrote about how animals behave, both in laudable and in reprehensible ways.
The Legend of Wade is a classic example of lost literature. We have so much that survives of medieval writing, but also so much that we know does not survive. And here in this Peterhouse 255 manuscript, we see just 3 lines, just a snippet of what would have been a widely known story in the Middle Ages. And it's a real gift to find this sort of tantalizing glimpse of a lost legend.